Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the MMA Outsiders. This is episode number 104. I'm Tom Albano, that's Zain Bando. Zain, UFC 308 is now officially in the history books, and dare I quote producer Pat from just before we started recording, UFC 308 as marked, it upsets some fans considering the fighters that lost, but it was a night of the changing of the guard, pardon me.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, this event, I think, lived up to the hype, and then some. We had an end still for those of you guys who have been living under a rock. Ilia Topuria did defend his featherweight championship, becoming the first man to ever knock out Max Holloway, which is crazy to think with how long Max Holloway has been in the UFC that he's never been knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had the emergence of arguably the number one contender in the middleweight division in a fight that I think a lot of people were very excited to see. And he proved to me, you, and probably every single person in the country of Australia wrong this past Saturday. And to go back to your changing the guard point, it was changing the guard and then some, I would say.
And to the Hamzat one, also doing it in some pretty gruesome fashion.
Oh,
Pretty gruesome
1,000%.
fashion too. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Before we do, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network. Again, that's us here on YouTube at youtube.com/ETB Network, where you'll find all of our episodes, everything else here at the Empty the Bench Network, whether it be our other shows, Bando's Breakdowns, ETB Sports, Football Forecast, Forever Power 5, and so much more.
Yep.
Of course, if you don't want to watch us and see our ugly mugs, or you want to take us on the road with you, you can listen to the MMA Outsiders wherever you get your podcasts, whether it be Acast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and so much more. Also, don't forget to follow us across social media on Twitter, or aka X, Instagram, and TikTok at MMA Outsiders ETB, and do the same for the Empty the Bench Network at ETB Network. And then, of course, we have to give a shout out to our friends over at Playback, who have continuously been great sponsors for us. Zain, Pat, and I did a UFC 308 fight study back on Thursday, a couple of days before the card happened. And we will, of course, do one for UFC 309, UFC 310 as well. So, again, everything here at the Empty the Bench Podcast Network, including the MMA Outsiders, is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much of our time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together, with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, repping your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join us here at the ETV Network for the NBA Whip Around, as we'll call it, on Wednesday, October 30th, 6:45 p.m. Eastern, as we bring you an NFL Red Zone style broadcast featuring 5 NBA games: Celtics versus Pacers, Pistons versus 76ers, Lakers versus Cavaliers, Knicks versus Heat, and Nets versus Grizzlies. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETV Network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. So that's the next edition of our live streams on Playback. We'll have a little NBA Whip Around stream on Wednesday, right before Halloween. So that should be fun. And then, of course, the week of UFC 309, time and place to be determined. We will have a UFC 309 fight study, but that is then. This is now. And Zain, the now is the time of Ilia Topuria. Ilia Topuria becoming the first fighter, as you mentioned, to ever knock out Max Holloway the fight itself was great, but pretty shocking kind of fashion, as Topuria gets the third round finish and retains the UFC featherweight championship. I thought it was a very competitive outing. we kind of talked about it in the lead up to the fight, including on the fight study, about Ilia Topuria wondering if he was going to rush in and Holloway maybe trying to keep his distance. And it took Holloway a little while because Ilia was getting the better of him and was managing to get inside in the first few minutes. But Holloway eventually was able to keep his distance. The other thing was, and we kind of talked about it when we were talking about Max and his struggles against Volkanovski, Zain, we talked about the leg kicks. And guess what Ilia did in the first couple of rounds? He brought out the leg kicks.
Sure did.
Holloway managed to adjust. You saw his boxing on great display in the second round, but in the third round, I guess Holloway kept his distance a little bit too much. Ilia was able to get inside and basically trapped him against the cage, and that marked the beginning of the end. I believe it was a left hand, a little flurry, and it was a right hook that ended up dropping Holloway completely to the canvas.
You actually have it.
It was a right hand with a left hook.
Correct.
Okay, right hand and then left.
It was the inverse of exactly what you just said. But in any event, though, overall, I mean, this was a tremendous performance by the and still UFC featherweight champion of the world. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better you couldn't ask for a better performance from Ilia Topuria, just given all the hype surrounding him, all the people that doubted that he was a legitimate true champion. I think beating the two consensus greatest featherweights of all time puts you in a class of your own, and that's something that I think is very, very interesting. And I think something even more interesting too is the fact that Holloway, which I thought he was going to do later in the fight, he didn't try to switch up his strategy by using his wrestling or doing anything like that. It was just a pure kickboxing match, and honestly, you couldn't ask for anything more. And it just sucks that one guy had to lose because I really do respect both of them. But I think it just goes to show that, as Dana White likes to say every couple of years, he hasn't said it in a long time, but fighting is a young man's game. I understand that, Holloway is only 32, but if you think about it in fighting years, he's on the older side. If you
keep in mind he did debut in the UFC like he was 19 years old.
Right. What I was saying was he's older from a longevity
perspective. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No. You're absolutely right.
And what I think is even more what I think is even more interesting about this too, and it's something that you and I don't really speak of enough, but just the amount of foreign UFC champions that there currently are now. I mean, if you think back to like 5-6 years ago, where it used to be a pipe dream, for the UFC to go to places like Germany and to go to places like China and stuff like that, and now regularly we're on the discussion of, when are they going to South Africa? When are they going to Spain? All of these wheels are now starting to be in motion, and you have champions from these territories. I think it makes the sport that much bigger from a global scale. I mean, this fight was going on during a Real Madrid soccer game, and people were still watching it. So, if that doesn't tell you how big international sports are, including combat sports, I don't know what will. So
no, again, we talked about Ilya's star power, and I owe Ilya an apology because I said I thought maybe he was getting a little too big for his britches. I thought he was.
I don't think he is now.
He backed up his talk and did something that no man was ever able to do. And now look at his track record, Zain, of his four most recent fights. You have the submission of Bryce Mitchell, and the fact, and I think Pat kind of touched upon this when we were doing the fight study. He brings out his wrestling in that fight, and then he goes into the Josh Emmett fight, and you think, okay, maybe he's going to try to counteract Josh Emmett's power by taking him to the ground and just using that wrestling that we've seen from Ilya. And no, he then goes, and as we watched last Thursday's, just batters Josh Emmett for 5 rounds in one of the most lopsided decisions we've ever seen in UFC Fight Night history. Then he goes and knocks out Alex Volkanovski in pretty devastating fashion. And now he knocks out Max Holloway in devastating fashion. He's got 2 victories over featherweight goats. The Volk rematch apparently is going to be next. and considering how his star power is rising, as you mentioned, what he means to Spain, even in the middle of a Real Madrid game, that basically that Spain card that they want in a stadium in early 2025 is going to be next, and Volk
Yeah.
is going to have to enter enemy territory in order to get the belt back.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, I'm sure you'd agree with me. There's no bigger fight that they could do in Spain between two marquee names other than those two guys, right?
Yeah, it
So,
has to be. That has to be the main event. With Ilya retaining against Max in the style that he did, you have to make Spain next. You have to have a card in Spain.
no, I agree. Yeah, I was more so just wondering, do you think it would be a bigger deal in Spain if it was him versus Volk, instead of him versus like Movistar or somebody like that?
I know the argument here, and because Diego Lopez was also cage side. I want to
Right.
give Diego all the credit in the world. He is absolutely great. I love him. I love I love him as an up and comer, and I think he's on the doorstep of a title shot. But Volk's been waiting on the sideline. Like you talked about, the way that Volk has handled everything, he does deserve a rematch. I'm thankful that he's waiting until early 2025. He took the year off because he needed it. If he had gone right away into an immediate rematch, or if he had done anything like any of the other rumored fights, like going up to lightweight against a killer like a Dustin Poirier, it was probably going to end really bad for Volkanovski, and we would have had a really tough conversation about him. So, considering Volk did the right thing, waited on the sidelines, and what Topuria has done, you have to go to Spain next in the first quarter, or for even the first quarter, or even just the first third of 2025, and you got to have Ilya Topuria versus Alex Volkanovski 2 for the featherweight championship as your main event.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And I think what's turned the tables a little bit, I think for Max Holloway, and I think it was said best on the broadcast, Max Holloway can do whatever the heck he wants moving forward.
Yeah,
He
and
now
I stand.
even though he lost this fight in the way that he did, he's done more than enough in fight a who's who list of anybody and everybody across two divisions that he could literally choose to do whatever he wants on either side. So
Absolutely. So the comments that Max made in his post-fight press conference is he wants to take some time off. He doesn't want to come back until the middle of 2025.
that's correct.
And I mentioned it. I asked about it last week when we were previewing the card. Looks like he's entertaining. He kind of knows. He's lost to Volk 3 times. He lost to Topuria. He's probably not getting another shot at featherweight. He's interested, it seems like, in going up to 155 pounds and trying to make a run there.
Yeah,
And
he even said he would be down to fight Dustin Poirier again if the
in a
opportunity,
retirement fight, right?
if the opportunity ever presented itself.
And that's the thing. He could do that. We could see a great rematch of Holloway versus Gaethje again. And this time, we could see Max Holloway having those fights as a legitimate contender. If we were just going off of the one fight that he had 5 years ago against Dustin Poirier, I would be afraid, considering the way that he looked in terms of stature compared to a guy like Poirier. I would be afraid in terms of the way he was outclassed by Poirier. But the performance that he had against Justin Gaethje in that fight, I feel like, considering the kind of person that Max is, unafraid of any challenge, the fact that he has some excellent, crisp boxing, and I still regard Max Holloway as one of the best boxers in the UFC. I would just put Ilya Topuria right up there with him now. And as far as Max goes, considering his skill set, his experience, his name value, like you said, the lightweight division, if he truly is going to move up there, it's his oyster. We could see him versus Justin. We could see him versus Dustin. We could see him versus Chandler. God forbid Conor McGregor actually decides to step into the octagon again somehow. Maybe we could have him versus Conor.
Holloway versus Connor for a BMF would be unbelievable.
Is Conor going to really want a BMF belt, though?
I don't know. Given where he is in his career, I don't think he would be opposed to it. But
I feel like that's the only championship he can win at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. Definitely does seem that way. And given his cryptic tweet earlier in the day that we're recording this, it's just another day in the Conor McGregor saga. I guess another tweet and delete spree. In case,
Of course.
in case you missed it, he's
I
like,
I did.
he said, "Yeah, you're probably right. I'm probably gonna leave now. Bye."
I have no comment. Like you said, it's just another day in the saga. What I will just say is Ilya Tapur has proven that he is the man. He has done it. The featherweight division is his.
he is the man 100%. There's no denying it now. And anyone who wasn't a fan of him before, you don't have to be a fan of him, but you have to at least respect what he just did. He just beat literally the two greatest featherweights of all time in back-to-back fights.
And knocked him out. Both of them.
Pretty unbelievable.
Absolutely. Unfortunately,
Not just knocked them out in the most vicious fashion they've ever been knocked out. So
unfortunately, Zain, this is the MMA community, and if you're expecting civility and respect, just not gonna happen.
no, I know. But
in
my humble opinion, you should respect Deportia's greatness for what
absolutely.
And I don't just mean you. I just mean the public in general.
I know. And you know who else deserves some respect? Khamzat Chimaev. Just, oh my God. Zain, did you see the post-fight photo of Robert Whittaker's jaw?
I did. That's so sad, man. Apparently he's going to be out for 6 to 8 months, and he could have his jaw wired shut for a little bit.
He actually did. I don't know if you saw this. I think it was Submission Radio. It was an interview with somebody. He basically tried to play it off like, oh, he's had teeth problems since he was a child. His teeth were just completely dislodged away from the jaw. It looked like.
Yeah, that
was gruesome,
scary. Which even Dana admitted afterward that he didn't know why he was tapping so quickly, and then the truck told him that
nobody knew. But then, right, nobody knew. Then the commentary mentioned, as you said, what the truck said. And then Cormier goes and shows the photo, which one, really, Daniel, and number two, just goes to show how powerful Chimaev, because I don't know, maybe it was the elbow that he landed and then combined with the face crank, because I don't know if it would have come from the face crank in and of itself.
I don't know. I think it could have come from both or one or the other. But if I were to guess, I think how I could put it is the face crank was the finishing touch, if you will, to a jaw that was already compromised. That would be how I would describe it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. So I mean, it
just sucks though now because I'm worried for Robert Whittaker that he's gonna go down the path of Frankie Edgar, where Frankie Edgar got 1 million title shots after losing the lightweight championship, didn't win a single one of them, and then went on a really bad losing streak. So I just worry that doesn't happen to Whittaker.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope not too. Although I do feel great for Chimaev because remember what we pointed out. The only guys prior to Chimaev who have defeated Whittaker at 185, ever since he moved up to 185 a decade ago.
Are the current champion and the champion before the current champion. It's
pretty Adesanya and Dricus Duplessis.
It's pretty good.
Which means probably some great things for Khamzat Chimaev then. Because the way that he performed,
which, by the way, Chimaev, and I know this is no disrespect to your guy, but if Chimaev ends up winning the middleweight title, then it even makes Robert Whittaker look even better because then he can say the only guys that I've lost to have been guys that have gone on to win the belt. So,
absolutely. And actually, Zain, that brings up a question about what is next. Whittaker, obviously, it's just going to have to be rest. But I actually did throw up a poll on our MMA Outsiders account, and I asked, with his first round submission and his dominant win over Robert Whittaker, did Khamzat Chimaev just jump Sean Strickland for a shot at Dricus Duplessis? 84% said yes, absolutely. The other 16 said no, you have to do DDP Strickland 2 first. Obviously, Zain, my answer is going to be a two-prong answer. Number one, I don't think Dana White cares. I don't think the UFC cares. When they have a star they want to build like Chimaev and he has this kind of performance, they're going to give the title shot next regardless. And number two, Yes, even I personally have to agree with. I don't always agree with the rankings. I don't always agree with Dana White's practices, but when you consider Sean Strickland's weaker resume and you consider what Khamzat did here, I feel like Khamzat's probably jumping the line, and he's earned a right to.
It's one of the rare cases where I'm gonna have to disagree with you. I think you stand on merit and you go based off what the rankings say, because to me that's disrespectful to the guy who just lost the belt in his last fight, in a fight that a lot of people thought was very close, and some people, which obviously we've debunked this already, but some people still believe that he won, and I feel like there's still unfinished business there. I understand Chimaev looked much more impressive in his outing than Strickland has in probably about a year and a half or so. But I don't know. I just feel like you got to close that chapter first before you give it to Chimaev. I understand the other side of the argument because he's healthy right now, and you don't want to get into a situation where
He's on the sideline again.
Strickland, and then all of a sudden, exactly, that Chimaev isn't on the sideline.
Okay, can I play devil's advocate though?
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm doing this because you know how much of a mark I am for DDP. Let's say you do the DDP Strickland 2 fight then, and Strickland wins it. Wouldn't you say then you have to do the trilogy, which means poor Khamzat's going to be waiting on the sideline then?
It depends on how the fight goes. If the fight's quick and the fight's one-sided, then no, I don't think so. But if it's close,
if it's like the first fight though,
right. If it's close and it's hotly debated and no one really knows who truly won, then yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Now, actually, this is an argument that I haven't thrown out. Why not you just have Strickland fight Chimaev in a title eliminator and settle it that way?
I'm cool with that too. The problem is going to be, Zain, I'm cool with it. You're cool with it. The problem is going to be Sean Strickland. He's not cool with it. He's standing his ground, and he's basically pulling the Stipe, pulling the Juliana, and pulling the Colby and saying, I'm waiting until I get my title shot. Which then goes back to a conversation that we had last week about, these guys who are waiting out title shot. Now, all these guys, I mean, it's proven successful. Stipe waited out all the Brock Lesnar rumors and got his rematch against DC, won the belt back. And now Stipe has waited out all this stuff that was happening at the top of the heavyweight scene. It's been 3 years, but now he's getting a title shot against John Jones next month, or I should say in 3 weeks' time. Juliana Pena waited all this time, and she's just reclaimed the title.
Well, I was just going to stop you there. We're going to have to be waiting on bated breath for the next 3 weeks because we know what happened last year.
I know. But my point is, on one hand, yeah, it's proven to be a successful and calculated measuring move. On the other hand, I fear if this becomes the norm, this is going to be a step towards turning MMA into boxing.
Yeah, I think you're going a little bit too far with that. I think it's just a little bit of a more recent trend. So I hope it doesn't get that way. There are some divisions, as we spoke about before starting this episode tonight.
You're right. There are divisions that are exceptions. Lightweight, because that division's full of killers. Light heavyweight, because Alex Pereira just continuously saves the UFC's ass. But heavyweight's a bad one. I'm fearing middleweight's about to be a bad one. Welterweight, we hope not, with Bilal now as champion. There are divisions out there that are just not good.
Well, you could even say the same thing for women's bantamweight.
Yeah, that too.
So, but hey, at the end of the day, though, the UFC is a good problem to have. They have 2 solid number 1 contenders. Mm-hmm. One guy who's a former middleweight champion, and another guy who just beat the best 1A former champion that arguably anybody's ever seen. He could be in the same class as the Alex Volkanovski, or excuse me, as the Max Holloway in the era, to where he couldn't and still can't win in the featherweight championship. He's now entered into the that early discussion of AAA fighter that you and I always talk about. So
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of title shots, Magomed Ankalaev. I'm gonna get it out there right now. I was not amused by this fight. It was not entertaining to me in the slightest, as most people seem to agree. However, it seems like Dana White, it's funny. We said this whole time, Ankalaev should be light heavyweight champion after the controversial fight with Jan Blachowicz. The UFC doesn't like Ankalaev. After all this time, Zan, all of a sudden now, Magomed Ankalaev, this Dana's like, okay, good enough. He's getting the title shot. Like, I'm shocked by what Dana said. I'm not going to argue against it because I've been on the Ankalaev, soapbox, if you will, for a while now. But I'm just shocked that it was this fight that earned him the title shot, or this performance, I should say.
well, I just have to call out Dana for a second. Did you notice at the post-fight press conference that he said Ankalaev looked good? But whenever you looked over to see if he was watching the fight, he wasn't watching the fight.
Yeah. Something's up there. Something seems suspicious. He wasn't watching a fight. It wasn't a great fight, but he's saying he looked good. Like, I don't know, Sand. Is something troubling about this?
Yeah,
I mean, there wasn't a Canelo fight he could be distracted by.
Well, no, but there was the Catterall Brogy fight that he could have been distracted by too. It was going on at the same time.
You know what? That's very true. He's always distracted by boxing, but Zan, this forces me to bring out what seems to be my favorite sound effect, the sound effect of the year for ETV in 2024. Seriously, if that performance is Dana saying, "Oh, he looks good. Oh, he looked great. He's getting the title shot next." Then either number one, Dana White is just out of options for light heavyweight, which we've talked about is true. Or number two, something's going on that's
I'm gonna
smells fishy.
I'm gonna go on record and just say this right here, right now, and directly in front of the camera. I will make you a deal. If Alex Pereira versus Magomed and Ankalaev gets made, I will come on this show and personally wear a Magomed Ankalaev t-shirt on the show if the fight.
Wait, do you have a Magomed Ankalaev t-shirt?
No, I'm willing to get one though.
Okay, you may need that at the ready because, I mean, it's going to be made. One way or another, it is going to be made because it's going to end up getting made because technically he is now the number one contender. Pereira's beating Hill. Pereira's beating Yuri. Pereira's even beating Khalil Roundtree. So
and Ankalaev has the longest active winning streak in the UFC light heavyweight division with 11 wins in a row.
Correct. So I know the expression, Zain, from The Odd Couple is when you assume you make an ass out of you and me, but I'm going to take a guess that somehow, some way, this fight's going to end up being made because.
So, but there's a difference between it getting made and it happening. Do you actually foresee the fight it actually happening? Because it's one of those fights where I don't think I'll be able to believe it until the day of the fight.
I mean, Sam, this is Alex Pereira that we're talking about, who has saved the UFC's ass on 3 occasions this year. This is not Conor McGregor we're talking about.
That's true. That's a good point.
So there is that.
I just feel bad for Rakic. What a horrible 2024 he's had.
Yeah, it's been getting knocked out by Yuri and now losing to Ankalaev in the way that he did.
On 2 of the biggest cards of the year too.
Yep.
Which is even more disappointing.
Yeah.
He'll be back. He'll be headlining or co-headlining a fight probably in, who knows, France, Russia, Paris, Poland, or somewhere international that I'm not.
Apex.
That actually does sound a little bit more likely to. And who knows, he may end up fighting the loser of a fight that we're going to talk about a little later on. That's actually he might not, considering there's 2 different divisions. But speaking of, you might want to consider changing weight classes.
I was just gonna say, are you suggesting Alexander Rakic look at heavyweight?
It's not out of the realm of possibility, considering the UFC needs more heavyweight contenders anyway. So
fair enough. All right, if we're gonna call almost forgot. So, how do you give a grade? Because most people, about 3/4 of the people who voted in our poll, gave it a great. I don't know if it topped UFC 300 by a long shot. However,
I don't think it topped 300. I could definitely tell you this: it topped UFC 307 for me personally.
Absolutely.
And this is no disrespect to the Sphere card, but I could argue that this card was better than the Sphere card.
I think, Zain, this is the first UFC in a while that, I mean, other than maybe UFC 305, that I feel like we were given a relief that this was a pretty good card, and I'm willing to give it A-, B+ range.
I'd say solid A.
Okay.
For solid A, I've given I'd have to go back and look at the archives. Probably the first solid A I've given since 303.
Probably. Because right now it seems like with my end of the year rankings, 300 is 1. I think 303 might be 2, and then 299. Or the other way around. 300's the top one.
Yeah, I'd say for me it would be 301. Actually, I would say, 300 at 1, 299 at 2, and right now I would say roughly this card at 3, and maybe UFC 305 at 4.
That's a good ranking in my book. So you called out Dana White. Let's talk about Dana White. Probably the biggest thing coming out of the post-fight press conference.
This was massive.
Were comments that he made about Francis Ngannou. So Francis Ngannou fought in the PFL, the pay-per-view card that happened about a week ago. Got the knockout, first round knockout of Henan Ferreira, became the PFL Super Fights heavyweight champion. His first fight back in MMA since leaving the UFC. His first fight since the loss of his son Kobe. Right. And Dana White had, the old expression, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Yeah, that doesn't apply to Dana White.
Yeah, he threw that in the trash this Saturday and then some.
I mean,
so first off, because I'm a bit of a psychopath when it comes to this stuff. I'm willing to say before we get into the analysis of this, but that this had to be, in my opinion, one of the top 5 most quotable Dana White rants that I've ever seen in my entire life. It's one of those ones where once you'll rehear it over and over and over again, you won't forget it.
Right. I will just throw in a bunch of those quotes right now, just in case anybody missed it. I'm going to take some of these quotes from the MMA Junkie compilation of sorts, if you will. Ngannou didn't want that fight with Jones. He could have stayed and took that fight. He didn't want that fight. Tom Aspinall deserves that fight. So that was one. When have you ever heard a story in all the years about us owing a fighter money? We've been a business, even when it was upside down, where we owed somebody money. Never happened. So he's full of shit there. Then I lost. I didn't lose anything. I was done with Francis after he actually owes me money because we had to watch that fight with him and the Black Beast. He should actually pay me back for that fight and all of you. And me praying for him to fail, trust me, I don't think about Francis that much. You guys asked me the question about the PFL last week, and I responded. Other than that, the only one who's praying for his demise is probably the PFL because they signed a shitty contract with a guy that doesn't deliver any numbers in ticket sales or pay-per-views. And they've got to keep paying this guy for however long. Good for him, not good for them. Let me tell you what. There were 2 guys here. Sorry, there's a lot that he mentioned. Let me tell you what. There were 2 guys here. I wanted to cut him. Someday I'll tell you the story. I was all about Francis at the beginning, and I found out who Francis was. I told the 2 guys who asked me not to cut Francis. When somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Believe me, I had no sleepless nights over Francis leaving. I didn't like Francis as a person. Wasn't a guy I wanted to do business with. I didn't like Francis. My boys were telling me he's misunderstood. And I told them when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. It wasn't about him becoming the heavyweight champion of the world. Francis isn't a good guy. He plays the good guy. Quote, I don't understand the language. Quote, unquote. So he seems like he's a nice guy. He's not. He's just not a guy that I wanted to be in business with, period. End of story, whether he became the champion or not. We'll never be in business together again. I mean, you can tell we don't like each other. And this goes way back. This goes back to before the first Stipe fight. He pulled some shit before the first Stipe fight, and I said, I'm done with this guy. And then Stipe beat the shit out of him. Great night, and we never had a relationship after that.
So, do you know what Dana just did without him actually doing it?
What did he do?
Do you, even though it took him a year and a half to finally say it without saying it?
That he doesn't like.
That's the no. That's one part, but that's the reason why you never saw him put the belt on him after the Ngannou win.
Yep.
He just revealed why it took him a year and a half to finally say it, but he said it.
He spilled his guts.
He said it.
And then some. This is tough. And I have to keep in mind my relationship with the PFL as I do this. So the PFL numbers for the pay-per-view came out. I mean, they are what they are, according to the reports. But look, I don't think you can be envious with Francis Ngannou. And I kind of talked about this last week. You know, and actually I saw you quote tweet a very old clip from like episode 30 something when we talked about Francis leaving the UFC. And we talked, and it's this idea of, you know, we can't say at this point that Francis fumbled the bag because he got 2 boxing fights, nearly beat the WBC heavyweight champion, got paid very well for both fights, got paid pretty damn well for his PFL pay-per-view fight, became the PFL Super Fights champion in the process of doing so. He's the chairman of PFL Africa. I mean, you know, he did not fumble this bag at all. I understand Dana White's frustrations, but at the same time, it feels like, I mean, Zain, coming off of that emotional, you know, victory that he had and the story of Francis Ngannou, it feels kind of messed up that he's saying this stuff now.
I would disagree, and I actually will take it a step further and say I think Dana's message was more a direction toward Francis's management than Francis himself.
I think so, because he's talked about Dana in the past having a problem with Francis's management, did he not?
Yeah, yes, he has on several occasions. Mm-hmm.
That he doesn't like the people around Francis.
Mm-hmm. So for him to directly call out Francis, though, and say that he's a bad person was definitely surprising. Definitely.
And
I
don't know. And
also, here's another interesting question. If you think that he's a bad person and you offered him the John Jones fight for $8 million or whatever the number was, if you really thought that he was that bad of a person, why did you try? Why did you push to re-sign him for a year?
Right.
That would be my other question. And
again, Francis made Francis made so much more money, you know, with 2 boxing fights and a PFL fight, a PFL contract rather, considering he's also a chairman of sorts there, than he would have made fighting John Jones under the normal UFC contract.
Right. Then Francis came out afterward and said that he's made 5 times more money than he ever made in the UFC.
So regardless of what you think about the PFL and the pay-per-view purchases or the contract, I mean, Francis made, or the fact that we'll never see Jones and Ngannou, you know, Francis made the right business decision.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. What I think is the disappointing part in this whole thing, though, is, you know, if you go back years ago, right? This was like 2021. You know, when he was supposed to fight Derek Lewis, and then Lewis ended up fighting Cyril Gane instead. Mm-hmm. The part where I think doesn't make sense to me to this day is the fact that they had a date. It was going to be June. Then all of a sudden, they're like, okay, we need to push it. And then they spun it. It was Francis who said they needed to push it when they were ready for June. And they wanted September, and they're like, oh, you can go off to Cameroon and do whatever they're gonna do, and we're gonna make the interim title fight. I think, even though he's saying it really started before the first Stipe fight, I think it really came to a halt when they forced the interim heavyweight championship upon him.
I think so too.
without knowing what was going on.
Now, granted, that Derek Lewis fight was terrible. And I said, oh God, no, do not book Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis too. It would be an absolute nightmare considering what happened the first time.
Right, which they're probably thankful that never happened.
Right.
So,
right. And I'm thankful never happened.
Right.
But just at the end of the day, if this is about stuff, Francis Ngannou, I don't know, Zain, you may have observed it a little more than me. I don't know many times, if ever at all, that the UFC ever came out of Francis Ngannou's mouth in the pre-fight build-up. I think a lot more of that came from Don Davis than Francis Ngannou.
Yeah, I don't think I heard Francis ever mention them once.
So, and the Don Davis stuff, that's a different conversation that we can have.
Right, exactly.
So, I'm not a fan. I understand Dana was frustrated by the whole thing, but I don't know if this was right place, right time. At the end of the day, look, Francis made the best business decision for him. And again, we still all lose.
That was my initial thought process too. But if you also remember, I said, because you know how I am when it comes to this stuff, I can separate both sides of the equation. I was very upfront when he signed with the PFL. I said I'm happy for him that he's doing what he wants to do, but I'm also sad at the same time that the biggest heavyweight fight in the sport
is never going to be made.
Is never going to happen. So,
but to counter that, some of that can fall on Dana and his inability. We see all these other promotions willing to do interpromotional stuff. There's only one brand that never does interpromotional stuff.
Well, I have a theory, and even though my theory isn't fully proven with numbers, it's just logic. I think they're worried that some of their champions are going to lose. That's why.
No. That's exactly why Chuck Liddell lost in the Pride middleweight Grand Prix all those years ago.
2003, yeah.
And that's caused, and for whatever reason, that's caused a lot of trauma in Dana, and he doesn't want that. He doesn't want to risk the UFC being the high and mighty number one MMA promotion in the world, which is kind of silly when you consider. I mean, it's understandable, but silly at the same time, because when you consider the production value and everything else that goes into the making of an MMA promotion, the UFC is the clear number one.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on this, I cannot wait to hear the full story of what really transpired, because I think this whole conflict deserves a mini documentary by one of the MMA content creators in itself, because that's a documentary that I would absolutely watch.
Absolutely. Another MMA news. Part of the...
And it's kind of related to the same thing.
Right, because we talked about Francis Ngannou and the amount of money that he's made outside the UFC versus with the UFC.
And he said, he's like, when have you ever heard a story of where we owe guys any money?
Well, now you do. You owe $375 million to all your fighters between 2011 and 2016.
Right.
But again, this is only for the first lawsuit. So obviously you had the whole thing with Judge Boulware rejecting the initial settlement and everything that happened.
And you know they're still pissed about that. You know, you know that.
Right. And here's so we saw all that happened. Even Dana saying, well, I went to high school with this guy. So basically saying it was a personal. Okay. Anyways, the Cung Lee portion of the antitrust lawsuit settlement is done. $375 million is now going to be paid out. However, that's just one part of the settlement. The reason it's one part, there are no contractual changes. However, the Cajun Johnson portion of the lawsuit, covering fighters from 2017 to, I think, 2021, that's still in court proceedings right now. There was that whole suggestion, I don't know if you remember, Zain, that basically the UFC wanted to settle both lawsuits in one, and that's why basically you weren't seeing too many of the contract changes or anything like that. And the Johnson antitrust fighters were basically in risk for double jeopardy, basically. So we have a settlement for one lawsuit, but there's another lawsuit that's still out there.
Right.
I don't know. And also, sorry, Zain. Also, one other thing, we also need to wait and see how this 375 million is going to be paid out to the
Right.
fighters.
Right. And I think to put it simply, the without getting too emotional over it, I guess, some of the testimonies from some of these fighters, some notable former names, if I might add, are pretty disturbing, to say the least. And I gotta say, to hear Dana say what he said about Shane Carwin, just to not sugarcoat it, was a very tone deaf answer, in my opinion. That was quite alarming, and I'm sure you probably felt
Yeah,
similarly.
because Shane Carwin, I mean, at one point, Stan was one of the most talked about fighters in the world. And to see what's happened to him in the years since has been downright sad and in some ways disturbing.
Same can be said for Jessica I as well.
Yeah.
That's even worse. I mean, for some of these fighters to say that they can't even finish the literal degree that they started because of this is really disappointing.
Especially, Zan, when you mentioned when we talk about all the damage that these fighters suffered, I still can't get when Jessica I's name is mentioned, the Valentina Shevchenko head kick knockout out of my head.
Oh, I was scared even watching that in person. I was like,
That's right,
what?
you were there for that. It was Chicago.
I was there.
Ugh. So yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen because I want to see how this gets paid out. Because you consider the fighters over a 6-year period, I'm afraid it's not going to amount to too much per fighter.
Yeah, that's the disappointing part. And who knows? Obviously, we're not in every minute detail of the lawsuit, but could you imagine if like this is the number that was like dumbed down where it like should have been like 600 million something like that, and this is the number that he toned it down to. That would make it that would make it even worse. So
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion, given how many fighters there are, they should have been able to earn whatever it is that they want. But I think it just goes to show the cycle of a sport. Number one, that's still too young, and number two, has a long way to go from like a collective bargaining agreement or a union, unfortunately. And if they want to be taken seriously as one of the biggest global sports in the world, there needs to be more. There needs to be more adequate change. You've got all these other three-letter leagues, the ones that we know very well, the one and that's currently taking place right now as we're recording this. There needs to be further fighter oversight. And I understand they always talk about that same statement they make every year. Oh, they reinvest back into the sport. I even saw it firsthand with the Performance Institute. They're definitely making strides, but they could be doing a whole lot more, especially considering that they are the leader in the industry. So,
Absolutely. Well said, Zan. I can't even add anything because you said it so eloquently.
oh, I try. Thank you. Yeah, of course. Absolutely.
So one other news story before we preview some of the UFC Edmonton fights. There was long rumors about what was going on for UFC Tampa on December 14th, the final UFC card of this year.
Right.
We heard Umar Nurmagomedov is not going to get a title shot, and instead he's going to face Song Yadong. We heard Colby Covington versus Ian Gary. We heard another Ian Gary fight. We heard another Ian Gary fight rumor. I had texted you about it. That he was going to
Oh,
face somebody, and then that fight never ended up playing out because they said that Ian Gary was going to fight Colby Covington. The Ian Gary versus Sean Brady was also one that was rumored. Yeah, it turns out, Zan, none of them are true. Umar versus Song was never agreed to. Covington versus Gary, that still has not been agreed to. And so here we are, Zan. It's your favorite situation. We are about a month and a half away from UFC Tampa. We have no main event for that fight night.
yeah. I mean, this is. Usually I'm good at coming up with main events on the spot, but this one, given that it's a fight night, and given that fight nights, usually don't have like this is no disrespect to the fight night format, but
Some it's like that.
some
It's like that
like
old Zan. It's like that meme. Sometimes good, sometimes shit. That's what it basically is.
right. Like I don't know. I mean, obviously, I don't know what could top the fight night card I was at a couple weeks ago. these two fights definitely would. But now, potentially with these two being off the table, I really don't know what you would do and what you could do in this situation. What sucks is, and I know we don't have her listed, but I mean, shoot, man, if Macy Barber was somehow healthy, that would have been someone that I would have looked at as to rebooking for a main event, considering that her main event opportunity didn't happen earlier this summer. But obviously, that's no longer the case now. So
it's tough, like you said, it's really tough coming up with a main event of sorts because you have this card. We still have to wait and see how 310 plays out. You know, they're building up 310 the week before as a really strong card. And you know what happens and the consequences of building some strong pay-per-view cards. The fight night's gonna suffer.
Yeah, especially considering it's the last UFC event of the year and it's the last in-person show of the year with fans. So
right, because then you know you're gonna have an Apex card and UFC 311 to kick off 2025, which you also need names for. And then quickly, Zan, right after that, in February, we talked about it. You got a UFC fight night in Saudi Arabia, and then Super Bowl weekend, you have 312 in Sydney.
And then you're going to have fight nights sandwiched in because, of course, you will. So I don't know.
It's
I mean, I'm just going to go on a limb and say I think one of these two fights is going to be eventually agreed to because these are like two of the few options that they have.
I would just feel really bad for Umar if that fight ends up being, because it seemed more likely that was going to be the main event, because it's like he's earned the title shot. He's earned the title shot to get to face Merab.
Yep.
He does not need to be fighting Song Yadong. No disrespect to Song Yadong, but Umar would probably wipe the floor with him.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a tough bind, and even when you look at Florida-based fighters, there really isn't a name where it's like obvious. You just stick them right in,
right? You know, and as far as Colby goes, look, I know we said he was, he's consistently waiting on the sidelines to get title fights and big fight. I'm sorry. There's no other the way he performed against Leon last year. At this point, if he wants a big fight, there is no bigger fight for Colby Covington right now than the guy he's been spouting out with on social media for the last year, in Ian Gary.
Well, what I think is unfortunate is, to me, and I'm sure I think this has been already reported, but it seems like the person that's holding it up is Colby Covington and not Ian Gary.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Colby Covington, really, there is no choice at this point. He wants big fights and he wants title fights, but he hasn't performed to the level that he deserves anything. Right now, if he wants a fight, Ian Gary is the guy.
Ian Gary's the guy 100%. I think there could also be a bit of nervousness or hesitation to take it, considering that if Covington loses, he probably has nothing else left to prove. So that's partially part of the reason. What do you think? You think either of these two fights end up happening or no? What do you think?
I don't think so, but at the same time, Zan, I don't have an answer. Like, this is a situation that leaves me scratching my head, because unless they have a fight in the works and fighters are already in camp, you're basically going to have a short notice main event for two guys now, or two girls now.
Yeah, or well, I think whoever wins the Magny Brady's fight, I think better be on standby in case anything else happens.
Do you think one of those two fights either Covington or Gary on December 14th?
I think Magny would be more likely to fight Covington.
That's okay. That was going to be my question: is Covington or Gary more likely to fight in Tampa? I would say Covington, because he needs to fight. We've seen Gary fight this year. We haven't seen Covington.
Right, and Ian Gary's still so young that he can just wait on the sidelines for however long he wants.
Mm-hmm. All right. Speaking of fight nights, Ann, we got one heading up north of the border in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, with a very huge, high-stakes main event. You talked about how you were in person, Zan, for the Brandon Royval Zerotira fight. But
this is the other half of the equation.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I'm excited for this one. You got a former title challenger or excuse me, a former champion plus a former title challenger against a surging contender. You
Yeah.
couldn't.
I mean,
You
you
couldn't.
could say, Zan, you could say Amir Albazi probably would have had a title shot several weeks ago if it weren't for an injury that he suffered earlier this year. Actually, pardon me. Actually, no. I feel right in saying that because the plan had been that Amir Albazi could have been involved in the title picture much sooner. But earlier this year, we had Moreno versus Royval because Albazi was hurt.
That's right. This is technically the remaking of the remaking, if you will.
Yeah,
So
and if you're Amir Albazi, I mean, Zan, that's the chip on the shoulder. That's the fire under him. You want a good performance, a strong performance against the former champion Moreno, because if you do, you could probably be next in line to challenge Alex Pantoja for the flyweight strap.
yeah, and I actually think Albazi gets it done. I think this is just a timing, calling meets destiny, whatever you want to call it. This guy's been chomping at the bit for a big fight, and I don't think he's going to waste his opportunity. I think he wins a very closely contested decision, 48-47. What do you think?
Uh, I'm sorry.
I think Albazi is going to beat Moreno by decision.
Yes, I agree. No disrespect to Moreno. I think it's just a matter of that, I don't want to say he's out of gas, but he is a little tired. He is a little tired. Royval managed to get the better of him earlier this year. And when you've got somebody as motivated as Amir Albazi right now, considering a strong performance probably nabs him a title shot now that Royval has beaten Tyra, I feel like that's presenting a big opening, and Albazi is not the kind to let that go to waste. I think this will be a fun fight, a competitive fight. I think Albazi edges him out on the scorecards in the decision. I agree.
Yeah, I do too. It's a solid main event on a card that I think is one of the most underrated fight nights of the year and might actually top this category as the best fight night card with fans if the fights deliver the way you and I think they might. So we'll see.
Okay, speaking of, we also have a major fight in the we also have a major fight for the women. We have Erin Blanchfield taking on Rose Namajunas. Before the show, Zan, we were discussing, fighters on the women's side who could be female fighter of the year. And a very underrated name, especially because the champions of the divisions we haven't really seen fight. However, we have seen Rose Namajunas, a former champion, fight, somebody with a big name to them. And she has surged back with a couple of wins this year, and now she's taking on Erin Blanchfield. Zan, it's not unrealistic to say a title shot could be in her grasp once again if she beats Erin Blanchfield. At the same time, Blanchfield wants to get another title shot of her own.
Oh, I think this is a title limit. I think this is a title eliminator for both.
Absolutely. Whoever wins is probably getting the title shot next.
I would agree, and it's one of those fights too where there's no pressure on either of them because whoever wins is going to get a very long camp because you better believe that it's only going to this fight's only going to happen on Whaley's terms. So, the longer or excuse me, whoever wins, they will have more than enough time to prepare for the eventual title shot, and I'm sure you'd probably agree with that as well. So.
Absolutely. Wait, this is a flyweight fight. This is for Valentina's belt.
Oh yeah. That's my
Okay, now that being said, Zed, you got a little ahead of me because we're talking about a potential title shot for one of these two. But we also did say, now that Valentina has the belt again, there is the opportunity the UFC might strike and do Weili versus Valentina.
So that ends up being a very nice transition into that, and that is certainly not out of the realm of possibility either.
So whoever wins this fight could end up being on the sidelines anyway, if that's the direction the UFC wants to go.
Right. Either way, my initial points still stands 100%.
So my question to you then is Rose Namajunas going to continue her successful run at women's flyweight and get a title shot against a Valentina, or be it whoever would win a potential super fight between a Weili and a Valentina?
It's a good question. I mean, she would have to beat Erin Blanchfield first.
But that's my question. Does she beat Blanchfield and get the title shot?
Unfortunately I'm gonna say no. I think she's getting to the point in her career where she's at a nice little resurgence, but I just think eventually it's gonna catch up to her, and this we're just gonna pass her by. And I think I think Blanchfield has been saying all the right things about how she's accusing Nama Yunus of Nama Yunus talking crap about her, and Blanchfield's like, oh, listen to any interview I've ever done. I've yet to say a single bad thing about Rose. Um, I think she knows what's on the line, and she knows that some of the narratives that are painted about her are inaccurate, and I think she's going to go in and show that she belongs in the upper echelon of the division.
And
So,
actually, Zan, I was just looking at a piece before. I was just looking at a piece where we were previewing this fight. You also can't forget something. We're talking about a potential super fight. You also got Manuel Figueroa in the wings too.
it's true. So
So
this could either be a number one contender fight or a wild card of all wild cards.
I feel like what the situation we were just in with middleweight with Strickland and Shimon, we might be in this kind of similar situation here, where a strong performance could lead to somebody jumping Figueroa.
Yeah, it's almost like the college football playoff. If you're a 13 seed trying to get the 12, but you need the potential 11 seed to lose in order for one team to jump another. That's basically the situation that we're in. So,
right. And then if the fight ends up being lackluster anyway, whoever wins neither might get the title shot. They'll just give it to Figueroa or book the super fight.
Right. And you better believe Figueroa is rooting for a boring fight, because if she gets it, she probably gets the title fight. So
yeah, and her versus Valentina would be a real interesting matchup given the bodies of those two and given the striking that those two have.
It would be one of the biggest international women's fights in the history of resorts, bar none, and arguably, and there's no question about it, it would be the biggest fight in the history of of uh of um of female female MMA in France for sure. It would be a huge fight.
Absolutely. I'm going to agree with you. I think, Zan, on the surface, this is a striker versus grappler kind of matchup where you have Rose with the striking edge, Blanchfield with the grappling edge. And I just feel like Blanchfield's grappling is going to be a little too much. I think Blanchfield has more size on Rose. And like you said, even though Rose has the experience, I think Erin is just younger, hungrier, probably has a good chip on her shoulder considering some of the back and forth between her and Rose. I see this one being a Blanchfield decision win.
I could definitely see that as well. I could see this being a decision win either way. All I know is that
also keep in mind this is a 5-round fight because this was the original main event.
True, and all I know is if this fight is the way we're predicting it's going to be, I would not be surprised if either of these two walked away with the decision win. Something just screams controversy to me, where people are going to be debating this decision for months afterward. So
it will be very interesting to see how the title implications play out if that's the case.
By the way, I would not be surprised if I know you hate when I do this, but I would not be surprised if a majority draw is on the table too. So,
one other fight that's worth noting: Derek Lewis, Joanta Diniz, probably an up-and-coming heavyweight. San, this is going to be less about Diniz. My thoughts on this fight more about Lewis. I love the Black Beast, I really do, but he just has not looked good in his last few fights.
Wait, you're not gonna give him credit for the win against Nascimento? I was there and I actually thought he was decent.
Okay, he looked decent in that fight, but everything else prior to that, Zan, it's a struggle.
I don't know if this is a curse or not, but Derek Lewis in November has not performed very well. Just wanted to keep that in mind. He lost to Almeida last year. He's lost huge fights in November in the past. He lost to Daniel Cormier in November all those years ago. Derek Lewis in November is bad news, man. I'm just letting you know.
I know. And that's kind of why also I'm leaning with Diniz in this one to get a finish.
Really?
Yeah.
That would be wild. I mean, I'm gonna have to go a little bit more conservative than you on that, but I like your bold.
I think this is one. Diniz he's 33 years old and he's 8-0. I know he hasn't. His UFC history has only been his win against Austin Lane, his win against Carl Williams. I know this feels like just a, feeding of somebody to a name like a Derek Lewis, but for some reason, maybe I changed my mind by Saturday. For some reason right now, why am I feeling an upset?
Well, I guess you just asked your own question. Why do you feel like you're feeling an upset?
I guess it's Denise's kickboxing. He competed in Glory. He competed, what's the other promotion that he competed in? Competed in Glory. He ended up competing in another kickboxing promotion that slips my mind at right now. But my point is, I feel like I'm worried the kickboxing might end up being too much for Lewis.
Interesting. I'm going to take Derek Lewis simply based on the fact that...
Oh, Super Combat.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Yeah, with that being said, though, I'm going to pick Derek Lewis based on a few things. Number one, he's got way more experience. Number two, the last time I picked him, I picked against him against a young Brazilian, which was back in May at a fight that I was at in person. I ate crap for it, so I don't want to do that again. And number three, Derek Lewis just doesn't seem to care who he fights because he knows that no matter who he's fighting, he has a chance to knock anybody out. And I think the right hand will find its home for a late second round TKO. It'll be a good fight early on. Dins will crack him for sure. He might even take him down and put him into a precarious position. But it's going to be one of those fights where I could easily see Dins gassing out and then losing in the next round. And that's what I'm going to go with. Well, I would not be surprised if I was wrong here. But I was a little bit upset considering that the month of October, in terms of this is no longer a main event, but I was a little bit upset that the month of October had treated me well in terms of main cards until last week. So I'm looking for a huge bounce back week, and this is one of the picks that I feel the most confident about out of the three fights that we went over this evening for sure. Should be a good card. Just a reminder, once again, 14 fight card. You could pick the card up exclusively on ESPN Plus. A decent start time for those of you on the East Coast.
5 p.m. prelims, right?
Yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah.
5 p.m. prelims, 8 o'clock Eastern for the main card. Again, make sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the ETB Network. Make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB and at ETB Network. Again, subscribe, youtube.com/ETB Network, or take us on the road with you and listen on Acast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. You can get the MMA Outsiders. And again, shout out to our friends over at Playback. Keep in mind, again, October 30th, this Wednesday, NBA Whip Around. 5 NBA games within the span of 3 hours or 3 hours, 4 hours, however long it is. We're going to follow 5 different games. So that'll be fun. A little NFL red zone style action for the NBA and our good friends over at Playback. But that's going to do it. So for Zain and Tom, we'll see you next time on another edition of the MMA Outsiders. Have a good night, everybody.
Take care. Good luck with the picks. Enjoy the fights. And just as a quick reminder, as we get into Halloween season and we eventually get into November, just wanted to remind you that if you choose to play and to be Joe Piper this Halloween, we just wanted to remind you to be Joe Piper.
Be Joe Piper.